In a single day, the sweetheart of this year's CES sold 10,000 units on launch, completely draining its first batch of pre-orders in just 24 hours. The next day, Thursday, they posted a second round of 10,000, all of which were gone by Friday. So on Friday, they opened a third wave of 10,000. On Saturday, they were all gone too. This is Rabbit's R1, a mysterious and powerful handheld AI companion gadget. They were expecting to sell at most 500 devices. Today, less than a week from launch, they have committed to over 60 times that. For only $200 with a promise of no recurring subscriptions, this bright orange square quickly became a favorite of the conference. Spurred by the rush of investments in generative AI, CEO Jesse Liu emphasized that R1 would be capable of more than the average GPT chatbot. According to him, Rabbit's debut device is all about performing actions, interacting with tech instead of just conversing with the end user. To make this happen, Liu calls the instrumental underlying tech of the R1 its large action model, a user interaction-focused version of the increasingly common large language model. Specifically, the R1 is a LAM-powered Tamagotchi, which is supposed to help detach us from the app-dominated software ecosystems of iOS and Android. Yes, less than a month into 2024, a relatively unheard of Santa Monica-based startup with apparently less than 20 employees launched something so widely successful and desirable right out of the gate. It's already being described as a serious contender for the iPhone of artificial intelligence. On top of that, Rabbit has already raised $30 million leading up to the public reveal of their keystone device last week. With the first batch expected to ship in March and the subsequent batches shipping 1 to 2 months after the last, avid rabbiteers won't have to wait long to experience this new phenomenon firsthand. Without a doubt, there's something special about the R1. It feels like nothing has really come close so far in the race to build AI gadgets. The most comparable thing to the R1 is probably the Humane Ai Pin, announced at the end of last year, also set to ship this March. Humane's Square has been hotly debated since it premiered at over 3 times the price, and with a required monthly subscription of $24, the AI Pin has no screen and instead projects its interface using tiny lasers onto your hand. Those choices might have already been enough to bury the AI Pin, and indeed, many already considered it dead on arrival right after it went public. But on paper, Humane still sounds competitive, impressive even. Founded by an ex-Apple design and engineering team, raising over $230 million, most would assume the Pin would be an instant success. And yet, before shipping their first product, reported just a day before Rabbit's R1 launch, Humane already laid off 4% of their staff, 10 employees. That means between March of last year and January of this year, Humane grew its headcount by about 50, since at that time they were reported to have 200 employees after 5 years in business. That's a sharp difference. That means the amount of employees that left Humane is more than half the total workforce that we're aware of at Rabbit, who was approaching a $100 to $150 million valuation in October of last year. So what was the secret weapon? What could have made Rabbit so much more universally acclaimed? Neither Humane nor Rabbit's devices have hit the market yet, but the media has all but forgotten about the little pin that was supposed to revolutionize the everyman AI hardware industry. In my opinion, the profound difference, besides the dramatically different pricing models, is ultimately design and engineering. And the prolific difference makers, the now iconic Swedish design and engineering warehouse, Teenage Engineering. Before we dig deeper, thanks for coming by. Make sure to like and subscribe below, as well as leave a comment on your thoughts about this. Oh, and if you're curious how the Rabbit R1 looks and works in person, I highly recommend MrMobile's recent CES hands-on experience, where he goes through the presentation as well as what it would be like to actually use it. Link in the description below. Now, back to the thrill ride. Founded in 2007, Teenage Engineering's nimble team has quietly created some of the most desirable pieces of hardware from its base in Stockholm, Sweden. Today, they are arguably considered the leading Swedish consumer electronics brand, internationally renowned for beautifully designed audio products. Their heritage goes back even further, however, to the days of the original PlayStation and Shockwave web games. In 1998, long before organizing Teenage Engineering, Jens Rudberg and Jesper Kuthuft, as part of the studio Game Design Sweden AB, released creative and unusual puzzle games. Most notably, Jens was a lead designer for the PlayStation's Kula World, also known as Roll Away in the United States. This style of game is perhaps familiar to fans of another '98 release, Glover, or the 2000s classic Super Monkey Ball. Kula World was a quintessential, cult classic, 3D physics-based game. Even if it wouldn't become a blowout success in the US, it released to generally positive acclaim, and even shipped bundled with some PlayStations in Europe as a part of a PAL Demo 1 disc. And through to 2000, Jens and Jesper continued on the path of game development, contributing to browser-based Shockwave games as their studio was acquired by NetBaby World. Through the platform, technology, and brand of NetBaby World, they would form partnerships with Cartoon Network, Lee, and MTV, particularly by powering web games with their clearly ahead-of-the-curve 3D engine. Over the next 3 years, the prodigious designers would be present for the publishing of over a dozen games. It was there that the trifecta of Rudberg, Kuthuft, and David Eriksson would work together. But by 2003, NetBaby World would go bankrupt and stop active work on any new projects. Thankfully, the site and much of its accomplishments remains online today, although more as a remnant in living history of the past due to the monumental changes in web tech over the past 2 decades. In the years that followed, leading up to Teenage Engineering's establishment in 2007, each founder continued design and engineering work. For Jens Rudberg, who would become the CFO and CTO of Teenage Engineering, that would take the form of freelancing under the brand Funflower AB. For at least those 4 years, he would work on technical projects ranging from software engineering to video streaming to online games for the now multi-billion-dollar King.com. Along the way, he would attract clients from across the world, including Nokia, Heineken, Ericsson, Levi's, and Doritos. For Jesper Kuthuft, who would become the CEO and head of design at Teenage Engineering, that would take the form of continued work at what he describes as like a fashion company, Acne Studios, which he co-founded in the late 90s. And it was the business side of Acne that motivated Jesper to leave, but the principles seem all too familiar: multidisciplinary, contemporary, attention to detail, and eclectic. And from fashion to film, after going solo in 2004, Jesper launched a Swedish production company, directing spots for Sony, Volvo, IKEA, H&M, Mitsubishi, and more. Quote, "Everything he does just has a great comical twist to it. He is equipped with probably one of Sweden's best creative minds." Although these are just a few of the stories and projects from the founders in the years leading up to Teenage Engineering, they illustrate a passion and willingness to push against the mainstream. As Jesper called it, Teenage Engineering would be an art technology consumer product. Quote, "To me, everything is interesting in one way or another. I try not to be stuck in a specific discipline, but instead learn and explore anything that comes my way." In many ways, teenage engineering represents an undying talent for design and engineering that is applied in a cohesive, ground-up style. A tendency for making things that feel outsider in nature, but with a level of care usually reserved for the most upscale and expensive of industries. This connecting line can be drawn between almost everything that the founders did leading up to 2007's teenage engineering. Teenage engineering started with just 3 friends. Jesper, Jens, and David, pooling their money together and transforming their warehouse into a bona fide hardware workshop. They accepted no venture capital and were relentlessly dedicated to fusing art and technology in a collaborative, independent atmosphere. Quote, "Instead of working for others, let's make our own products." As Jesper told it, "At one point, I started to share an office space, though it was more like a warehouse, with some friends. We started to share the space, and then, you go to lunch and you start to talk about ideas and dreams. One thing led to another. Suddenly, we started making projects together. We had this vision. I bought this CNC machine. We did the prototype and we started to travel, basically all over Asia to meet factories. We had to lie about the volumes because we had heard from someone that you have to say it's like 5,000 pieces a year. Finally, we met 2 Taiwanese guys that really liked the idea, and they helped us a lot because they had contacts with the factories. So that's how it started. Basically, we traveled and showed the prototype and learned." By 2010, teenage engineering showcased its first prototype to the world, the OP1. It was diversely featured and inventive, and yet it was as controversial as it was beloved. What could not be debated was the vision, something that was meant to be dense but approachable, powerful but accessible, pretty but functional. That wouldn't have been possible without the artistic, adventurous work the team had completed shortly after founding, back in 2007, when they created an architectural installation commissioned by Absolute Vodka, what would be their first of many unusual, beautiful projects of musical synthesis. The magic of something you'd, quote, never find on your local store shelves. This original work was different than their consumer prototype, and it was so influential to the team and the legacy of teenage engineering, they recently redeveloped it to be a consumer product for sale at $250 per choir member, each individually carved from solid beech and outfitted with an internal speaker and controllable with a variety of their other products. According to Jesper, the inspiration for the OP1 not only started there, but reached across industries, harkening back to the world of video games and grounded in the DIY mentality that pervades a company of only 10 people. But we said, okay, it's digital and we want it to be purely digital. While there are occasional references in the OP1's interface to traditional physical interfaces, most of the graphics you'll see feel straight out of old Atari video games. It feels more like a digital native art than an interface for music creation. By 2011, the OP1 would ship for $849. A year later, in 2012, they would already release accessories that challenged the use cases and ingenuity of the OP1, the crank, brick shaft, and bender. These snappy Swedish manufactured components allowed users to physically alter the OP1. Each of these interacts with the 4 main control dials on top of the device. The crank links up to the OP1's dials to allow for continuous turning. The bender wraps around them to add tension with an included rubber band, and these components don't just sound like Lego, physical building blocks that can be mixed and matched to the user's delight, they are literally Lego compatible. The third accessory, the brick shaft, adds support for genuine Lego Technic gears and wheels, opening the door for limitless customization and machination, especially in conjunction with Lego's Mindstorm kit, the motorized programmable toolset. That same year, the OP1 would take home the prestigious Design S Award from the Swedish Society of Arts and Crafts, Sweden's national design award, handed out every other year since 2006. For 7 years, the OP1 would captivate audio tinkerers and electronic musicians across the world until in 2018 the original unit ceased production. But it couldn't end like that. In about half that time, its successor, the OP1 Field, would be announced at Superbooth 2022. In between, Teenage Engineering would introduce a new project at least once a year in an uninterrupted streak of prominence from 2011 to today. One of my favorite descriptions of Teenage Engineering comes from this 2013 article in Fast Company. Teenage Engineering's office doesn't have a doorbell. You knock on a garage door, which is hauled aside to reveal something like a Batcave, if the Batcave had been designed by a committee of minimalist Swedes who collect white Lamborghinis. A series of diminutive electric cars lines one wall. Desks, packing boxes, prototypes, and sports cars compete for attention in the all-white space. The garage also houses a 3D printer, a laser cutter, 1980s arcade games, a workshop, and a room full of vintage synthesizers and turntables. Most of Teenage Engineering's founders are self-taught engineers who started off in the media world. Cthulhu directed TV ads. Another founder, David Mallerstedt, headed up the audio team at EA's DICE studio, which produced the Battlefield and Mirror's Edge games. To dive into each of Teenage Engineering's projects over the last 10 years, this video would have to be twice as long. And truthfully, this company is so fascinating, I'm tempted to do just that one day. In the meantime, what's most important is tracing the radical and wide-reaching repertoire of collaborations that cemented Teenage Engineering's reputation across not just audio equipment, but the hardware, design, and tech industry at large. Collaborations like the Pocket Operator, an exciting and through retro handheld released in conjunction with Cheap Monday, which further developed the iconography of Teenage Engineering. Cheap Monday, a now defunct clothing company with the tagline "Over My Dead Body," hosted the launch alongside some of Teenage Engineering's crew halfway through 2015 in London. For the layman, this line of synths was perhaps doubly compelling over their expensive counterparts thanks to the notably cheap price tag of $59 and the rich video game parallels. As Jesper Cthulhu relates, we really wanted to make a Game & Watch, but for the synth world, making that happen through their work with a provocative Swedish anti-establishment clothing brand like Cheap Monday that started off as a thrift store just makes sense, particularly considering Jesper's background in fashion. The Pocket Operator would be rekindled and expanded with last year's EP113 KO2, their most recent in-house release, marking yet another project that would be iterated and expanded on as Teenage Engineering learned and evolved. It was also momentarily revived before that in 2020 with the PO128 Mega Man, a direct involvement with Capcom to gamify the synthesizer even more for just $100. So many ideas like this one started off as stamped out visions that the team would keep pushing forward continuously. If there's something they love, the team won't let it go. Before heading into an enormously productive 2017, Teenage Engineering would dabble in the world of retro-futuristic analog media with the i1, a Polaroid-compatible camera, with the Impossible Project, a Dutch-based company intent on reviving the physical format of instant photography, a union of hardware and style, a distilled capturing of artistic motivation in meticulously engineered software. The i1, lovingly named in that oh-so-recognizable letter and number anaglyph, is as Teenage Engineering as it gets. Divergent and yet familiar. Then, in 2017, Cthulhu would spearhead another collaboration with a different kind of Swedish powerhouse, IKEA. Across the next few years, until its release in early 2020, they would flesh out the Frekvens line, which translates literally to frequency, playing into both companies' fortes: surprisingly affordable fashion, industrial Bauhausian design, and of course, modular audio equipment. As this article in Scandinavian Mind describes, I had met Jesper a few years back in 2017, and already back then, the fascination began with this creative entrepreneur who is able to design electronic instruments in such an effortless way that feels everything but intimidating. And as can be expected at this point, the limited release of the line's quirky speakers, from the $200 subwoofer to the $20 Bluetooth speaker, were quick to sell out. Just like the OP1, when it was attainable, it was easy to customize with accessories. From Jesper, we wanted to make something that feels like IKEA and at the same time challenges how we perceive them today. It's exciting to explore new territories, push the boundaries, and challenge each other. IKEA is furniture, meatballs, and soon, party. In that same year, Teenage Engineering had a breakthrough collaboration with Raven and Baidu to create what else but a set of smart speakers, the Raven H and R, priced at $256 on release. With a unique, understated aesthetic, these speakers shouted practical and complex. The Raven R would be described as an intriguing robotized device featuring the same speaker base as the Raven R, combined in a sophisticated motorized arm filled with sensors that will enhance interaction with the users. All of this was possible in apparently just 7 months of cooperation with Teenage Engineering, resulting in, quote, bold speaker concepts that indeed promoted truly cutting-edge designs on a global scale. My favorite line from this review, however, is the depiction of Raven as being representative of a humble, colorful, warm science. Next up, we have Nothing. An entire identity designed in tandem with Teenage Engineering in the 2020 darling startup from industry titan Carl Pei. Before, quote, pressing the giant reset button, Pei had previously pioneered with OnePlus, which, just like the Nothing phone and earbuds and watch, has been one of the few competitors in the smartphone ecosystem space that isn't dead on release. And perhaps this wouldn't have been possible without the brilliance of Teenage Engineering, who were a founding partner from day one. As described on the official Nothing site, they were the visionaries behind our product designs. Moving forward to 2021, we were graced with a remarkable, distinctive gadget that diverged even further from the historical track record of Teenage Engineering, Panic's Playdate. As The Verge reported, this would be one of many ambitious handheld consoles released in just 2021 alone. Much of them were included in my last video's subject, especially the Analog Pocket and the Valve Steam Deck. But unlike the rest of the 2021 class of video game portables, the Playdate, according to The Verge, looks kind of like a Game Boy that comes from an alien world. With a retro-first square display and a resolution of only 400 by 240, its primary control format is an unmistakable inch-long crank and a simple D-pad A-B button layout. Panic was a natural partnership, and just like Teenage Engineering was apt to do, would expand on the original functionality later down the line to introduce new offerings from the tiny, adorable machine. Who else would be such an unexpected but delightful partner, if not Panic, the indie video game publishing force behind Firewatch and Untitled Goose Game? Even last July, Panic showed off an MP3 player add-on, an oh-so-fitting companion to go with the anachronistic hardware marvel. And before the end of the year, we had yet another collaboration, the Mayku Multiplier, a rapid batch production industrial pressure forming machine, a way to manufacture custom molds and prototypes on anyone's desktop, as long as they can afford the arguably competitive $2,000 price point. And we're not done yet. In 2022, just over a year from the CES announcement of the Rabbit R1 that started off this video, we had yet another unpredictably innovative thing from the team at Teenage Engineering, the P080, a portable record player and maker. A democratizing, unbelievable box that is perhaps as creative as it is usable, and at an ever-attainable $150. So much so that on the official product page, Teenage Engineering wrote specifically not recommended or intended for a child 0 to 12 years of age. As The Verge would put it, Teenage Engineering is known for its playfully designed audio synthesizers you can digitally make music with, but now it's made a way you can save your tunes in the most analog way possible, on records. The Swedish company's new P080 Record Factory is a turntable that lets you cut your own lo-fi vinyl records and play them back as well. From 2007 with a handful of pioneers to 2012 with 18 teenagers to today with the breakthrough unparalleled success of the Rabbit R1. It's a tangled, messy story of innovation and compassion for the artistry behind the machinations. Teenage Engineering is a Swedish, multidisciplinary, imagination-heavy group that has spawned extraordinary devices, and they are not without flaw. They are certainly due their fair share of criticism based on the one-too-many lofty, unattainable, limited runs, the over-ambitious, form-over-function, hyper-stylized merchandise that only a post-war modernist could love. But they are Teenage Engineering, a warehouse of designers and engineers who have become a virtual tycoon of the new age of hardware and software. What they make, especially since we plunged into the tumultuous decade of the 2020s, sells out. The Rabbit R1 is the latest example of the unbridled, unrestrained creativity that is oftentimes 2 steps forward into the future, 1 step back into retro. That by no means guarantees success, but it sure as hell assures determination. And if Teenage Engineering's provenance is anything to go off of, they won't stop with version 1. They're here to carve a new path, 1 inch at a time. And with that, I'll see you next week. Thanks for coming by. Bye for now.